I have never seen an organization more committed to self-imploding than the WNBA. A few weeks ago, I made this video highlighting how it appears Brittney Griner said bleep white girl after fouling out in a game against Indiana Fever, the team that Caitlin Clark plays for. Some people like Jemele Hill, former ESPN host, says that no, she didn't say bleep white girl. She says bleep whack call, to which she then went on to call me a grifter for even pointing this out, but besides the point. You can watch and make up your own mind as to what it appears.
Jemele Hill just entered the most significant issue of her career when video of Brittney Griner using a racial slur against Caitlin Clark appeared online. Prior to this catastrophe, Hill hurried to defend her, but her defense backfired badly, and now she is dealing with a reaction that is turning her past disputes into amicable arguments. Please share your opinions in the comments section below on whether you believe media figures like Jemele Hill should protect athletes in the face of unambiguous video proof, or if they should wait for all the facts. Let me tell you, it's going about as well as you might expect. So here's what happened during the Indiana Fever's 81-76 victory over the Atlanta Dream. Oh boy, where do we even begin with this train wreck? Jemele Hill, the same woman who called Donald Trump a white supremacist and was suspended from ESPN for it, has now chosen to plant her flag on the most radioactive hill possible in defense of Brittney Griner's alleged racial remarks about Caitlin Clark. With 4 minutes remaining in the game, Brittney Griner fouled out. It's understandable that nobody enjoys being kicked out of a close game, but what happened next was that things got heated. Cameras captured Griner on the bench, obviously upset, moving her lips in what seemed to be some profanity. Since there is no audio, we're all playing the most contentious game of lip reading in the world.
The ticky-tack fouls that we were talking about earlier today.
However, a number of individuals, including some who are really skilled at this kind of stuff, think that Griner muttered "fing trash" after what appeared to be a foster girl, most likely referring to Caitlin Clark. This is where things get interesting. Riley Gaines, a conservative commentator and former swimmer who has gained notoriety for opposing transgender athletes in women's sports, shared information about this event on social media.
Thursday night, Indiana Fever and Atlanta Dream played. Indiana Fever is where Caitlin Clark plays. Atlanta Dream is where Brittney Griner plays. Now you tell me what it looks like Brittney Griner is saying here. For a little bit of context, this was in the fourth quarter after Brittney Griner fouled out against Caitlin Clark and Indiana Fever would go on to win by 5. Now I'm going to tell you what I think she said. Let's play it back. Looks to me like she is saying trash and then calling Caitlin Clark a bleep white girl. Just a reminder, this is who Joe Biden traded for the Russian merchant of death. So many WNBA players hate Caitlin Clark so much when she is the best thing that could have happened to the league. And she's not the best thing that happened to the league because she's white. It's because she's a good player. It's because she's the best player. Now, imagine if Caitlin Clark said the inverse of this. It would be reprehensible, condemned, and understandably so. You've got all of these individual players. You have sports commentators, people like Ryan Clark, who constantly tout of the racial tensions that exist in the league, when in reality, they are the ones perpetuating and amplifying these racial tensions with their anti-white hatred for Caitlin.
She reminded everyone that this is the same person as what she thought Griner was saying. America traded the Merchant of Death for that's when Jemele Hill decided to enter the chat, and boy did she come in swinging. Hill fired back at Gaines with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. She accused Gaines of spreading misinformation and claimed that Griner actually said "fosting whack call" instead of the racial comment. Hill also pointed out that the foul wasn't even on Clark, it was on Natasha Howard, so according to Hill's logic, why would Griner be talking about Clark at all? But here's where Hill's defense starts falling apart faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. First, let's talk about context. Even if the foul wasn't technically on Clark, she's been the center of every controversy involving race and the WNBA for the past year and a half. When players get frustrated in games involving the Fever, Clark's name tends to come up whether she's directly involved in the play or not. Second, and this is the big one, Hill is asking us to believe that in a moment of pure frustration, Griner decided to critique the officiating with the phrase "fuxing whack call." Really, that's what we're going with, because that sounds about as natural as a politician telling the truth. Let's be honest about what probably happened here. Griner was frustrated. She saw Clark on the court, and she let her emotions get the better of her. It happens. Athletes say stupid things in the heat of the moment all the time, but instead of just acknowledging that this might have happened and moving on. Hill decided to go full defense mode, and that's where the instant regret part of our title comes in, because Hill's defense has opened up a can of worms that she probably wishes she'd left closed first. Let's talk about the optics. Hill, a black media personality, is defending a black athlete against accusations of making racial comments about a white athlete. Now, I'm not saying that's automatically wrong, but in today's hypersensitive climate, it's not a great look, especially when the defense involves essentially calling everyone who watched the video liars. Second, Hill's credibility on racial issues has been questionable for years. This is the same person who built her entire brand on calling out racism wherever she thinks she sees it, real or imagined. But now, when there's video evidence of what appears to be actual racial commentary, she's suddenly become the world's most generous interpreter of lip reading. The timing couldn't be worse for Hill. Either the WNBA is already dealing with a massive image problem around how some players and media personalities have treated Clark and her fans. There have been months of complaints about double standards, about how Clark's fans are treated differently, about how any criticism of certain players gets labeled as racism while criticism of Clark is apparently fair game. And now Hill is essentially telling everyone that their eyes are lying to them, that what looks like a racial comment is actually just frustration with officiating. It's the kind of gaslighting that makes people lose faith in media personalities entirely. But wait, it gets better. Rather of arguing over what Griner said or didn't say, Riley Gaines never wanted to back down from a confrontation and retaliated against Hill. You claim to care about women's sports, but where have you been on the biggest threat to women's sports? Gaines turned to Hill's silence about transgender players in women's sports. In response, Hill instructed Gaines to go buy Leah Thomas some flowers and express gratitude for her rise to fame. In other words, Hill accused Gaines of stealing the transgender athlete issue, which is ironic coming from someone who has dedicated her professional life to exposing racism in everything from breakfast cereal to sports. Jemele Hill is a master at leveraging controversy to further one's career, but below the surface of this Twitter feud, Hill is defending the indefensible because she has positioned herself in an ideological corner and spent so much time defending black athletes against racist attacks that she is unable to recognize when those same athletes may be making racist remarks themselves. This is the same reasoning that causes people to defend obviously guilty people simply because they happen to share their political views or skin color. Hill refuses to acknowledge that Griner may have said something inappropriate because doing so would undermine the narrative she has been promoting for years, and that narrative is beginning to crumble under the weight of reality. The WNBA ratings have plummeted without Caitlin Clark, and fans are sick of hearing lectures about how they should and shouldn't support the league that Hill and others claimed was better off without all those new problematic fans. Instead of admitting any of this, Hill is sticking to the same old strategy, accusing anyone who disagrees of racism or ignorance. What's really annoying is that Hill could have handled this entirely differently, saying, "I don't know exactly what Griner said, but if she did make racial comments, that's not okay." Regardless of her frustration level, she could have used this as a teachable moment about how emotions can lead to poor choices and how everyone, regardless of race, needs to be held to the same standards. Instead, she chose to gaslight everyone who watched the video and saw what they saw. She chose to make excuses for behavior that, if the races were reversed, she would be demanding suspensions and sensitivity training for. And that's exactly why people are losing trust in media personalities like Hill. The double standards are becoming impossible to ignore. The selective outrage is getting ridiculous. People are smart enough to recognize when they're being manipulated, and Hill's defensive Griner feels like pure manipulation. Let's also talk about the broader context here. This isn't happening in a vacuum. The WNBA has been dealing with racial tensions around Clark. Since she entered the league, there have been hard fouls, there have been comments from other players, there have been media personalities constantly stirring the pot. Clark, to her credit, has handled all of this with remarkable grace. She's focused on basketball, she's been respectful to opponents and officials, and she's brought unprecedented attention and revenue to the league. But she's been subjected to a level of scrutiny and hostility that would break most people, and when video emerges that appears to show yet another instance of racial commentary directed at her, Hill's response is to defend the person making the comments rather than acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, Clark deserves better treatment. The fact that Griner has been treated like a child by the media for years. She was arrested in Russia for drug possession, turned into a political pawn in international affairs, and was eventually traded for a real arms dealer, makes the whole situation even more ridiculous. Despite all of that, she was presented as a victim deserving of sympathy and support, but now that there is evidence that she may have made offensive racial remarks, Hill is still standing by her. It's as if there is no conduct that would lead Hill to conclude, you know what, maybe this person isn't worth defending. The Riley Gaines angle adds even more complexity to this whole situation. Gaines has gained notoriety for opposing transgender athletes in women's sports, which has made her a target for progressive activists like Hill. As a result, when Gaines criticizes Gurrier's alleged remarks, Hill takes it as an opportunity to disparage a political rival rather than address the real problem. This is the wrong approach. It should be about upholding moral principles and treating everyone equally regardless of their identity or political affiliations. However, Hill is unable to see past her own prejudices. The irony is that Hill's defense is likely making things worse for Gurrier by refusing to acknowledge what most viewers of the video seem to see. She is so committed to her role as the defender of progressive causes that she is unable to admit when someone on her side may have messed up. This type of tribal thinking is poisoning discourse everywhere. If Hill had simply stated, "I can't tell exactly what was said, but everyone needs to be respectful regardless of frustration levels," he would have increased attention to the event and given the impression that a cover-up was taking place. Her defensive answer has turned the story into a multi-day dispute that is causing far more heat than light, which leads us to the instant regret aspect of the entire situation. Normally, this story would have subsided in a day or two. Hill's Twitter mentions are probably a nightmare right now. She's getting criticized from all sides, people who think she's wrong about what Gurrier said, people who think she's being hypocritical, people who are tired of her constant racial grievance mongering. The smart move for Hill at this point would be to step back and let this blow over, but knowing her track record, she'll probably double down even harder and make things even worse for herself. The whole situation is a perfect example of how toxic social media discourse has become, especially around issues of race and sports. Instead of having a reasonable conversation about what happened and how to move forward, we get tribal warfare where everyone retreats to their corners and hurls insults at each other. Clark, meanwhile, is just trying to play basketball and help her team win games. She's dealing with all of this nonsense while maintaining a level of professionalism that puts most veteran players to shame. The contrast between her behavior and the behavior of some of her critics is pretty stark, but that's the world we live in now. Athletes like Clark, who just want to play their sport and be successful, get caught up in political battles they never asked to be part of, and media personalities like Hill use those battles to advance their own agendas regardless of the collateral damage. The WNBA ought to be celebrating the fact that they have a player like Clark who has brought the league unprecedented attention and revenue. But instead they are dealing with ongoing controversy and declining ratings because some people can't handle her success. Hill's defense of Gurrier's alleged remarks is just the most recent example of how backwards things have gotten. We've reached a point where it's considered progressive to make excuses for racial remarks while criticizing them is seen as problematic. It would be amusing if it weren't so detrimental to the sport and the players involved, but this is where we are, and Hill's immediate regret is just the latest casualty in a culture war that benefits no one but those who profit from division and controversy. Jemele Hill's defense of the indefensible has backfired catastrophically, demonstrating once more that in today's media environment, when defending your allies becomes more essential than pointing out blatant wrongs, blind devotion triumphs over fundamental decency. What are your thoughts on this mess? You've completely lost the plot. Click like and subscribe to receive more uncensored sports comments.